right, hello and welcome everyone to New Earth Consciousness. Tanya here with Moira Mills. And Moira is an unschooling parent. She's also a human design expert and is utilizing human design to better understand her own child, and is also teaching parents on how to use it to understand their children as well. And what I want to say is Moira is a very lucky soul because she did not have to go through the meat grinder of public school education and got to be unschooled herself. So this woman is like total expert in unschooling. And so Moira, welcome. Thank you for being here.
Thank you for having me.
Yeah. So unschooling is a word that I've heard. Now, before we got onto the interview, I shared with you like just my journey in following Waldorf education, like looking for alternatives. And it really wasn't until I moved here to Washington State and I met my partner's friend here was way into unschooling, which is a word I had never heard of before. And so I know so little about it, but I've also I know a few people that I guess follow that. And so I'm kind of curious if you could define unschooling for us, and then we'll go from there.
So it is one of those terms that I think these days is really thrown around a lot, and sometimes it's not very well defined. So the way that I would define it is that it's leading from, we have an intrinsic desire and want to learn. So it's learning from that place instead of being told from the outside what is important to be learned. So we all, and I really believe that we are all intrinsically designed to want to learn things and to strive to learn things. We do it when we learn how to walk, when we learn the language. No one needs to remind us when we're little to do those things. And that's not something that just ends at 3 or 4 years old. That is something that we can maintain throughout our whole lives.
Mm-hmm. Okay. Yeah. And so how is that different from, let's say, because when you say that a child has, that all children naturally know how to learn.
Yep.
And I feel like, in the Montessori school, that's kind of how they approach it, right? Like let the child lead themselves. You just kind of have like an array of things that's out and about that they can kind of go and spend however much time they want to spend at each station doing different things. Waldorf is similar in that it's child focused, but very different in terms of like the curriculum is very specific, right?
Yeah.
So I'm curious about what is unschooling like? What was your experience being unschooled?
So I would say it's not, while it can be in a building, it's something that is just happening whenever, just by existing. So being out in life. So a big part of my unschooling childhood was being raised on a farm. So we were out with the animals. So the deal was I could have any animal that I wanted, but I had to feed it and provide for it, and it had to produce something. So I got interested in wool sheep. So it was really motivational for me to say, I can have anything that I want. I just have to be able to create it. My parents aren't going to buy it for me. I have to figure out how to pay for it myself. So most of my childhood was spent outside on a farm. So an example that I really like to use is math. So we didn't buy pre-formulated food for our animals. And also in Alaska, you don't have pastures. You don't just turn your animals out on pasture all the time. So you have to do research and figure out what this animal needs. So if you have a wool sheep, that's going to be different than a milk goat. It's going to be different than say a pig that you're bringing to market. So you have to learn research to figure out what are the needs of this animal. So instead of being tested like a multiple choice test, the test is reality, right? If you don't have a healthy animal, that is your test. So I really wanted to have sheep. So I had to figure out how to make money to pay for sheep. So I basically had a full-time job babysitting when I was probably 11 I was babysitting 30 hours a week. So I was very motivated to figure out how to make money so I could go have these animals, because that was like the most exciting thing for me. So anyway, I had to talk about math. So I had to figure out what these animals needed for nutrition. And then we formulated our own food. So it was, figuring out a tablespoon of this, a cup of this ratio to that. So when we went and fed them in the morning, we'd be taking scoops out of, 10 different containers to formulate a food that was optimal for who they were.
Mm-hmm.
And I think,
so it's very much real life experience, real life consequences, right? Learning through, learning through the results of your work and the direct impact. So it's not just playing on paper, like the way I was educated, right? Like reading books and taking tests and writing reports and things like that.
Right. You're living in the world, doing something that you care about, and then you're being tested on that. And it's something like maybe the test comes a year later, because you have a sick animal and there's something that's been missed. And that's a really inductive way of learning versus, going through a checklist and memorizing things and then being tested on like a standardized test kind of a way.
Right. And I would say that I think most parents, there's this fear of, oh, if I unschool, they're not going to get what they need for the real world. Like, I think that's a common fear. Like, how do I know that they're going to learn all the reading and the writing and, all that stuff, all the things that we're expected to know? Is that just like, where does that fear come from in your mind?
So I think that there's one element of it, that the current education system was put in place at a time that just the concept of the internet didn't exist, right? So there was this understanding of how the world worked and what was necessary to function in the world. The problem is that was the world of 150 years ago, right? The necessity for doing something like memorizing times tables was very different 100 years ago than it is today, right? Even just in the last, 20 years, there's a meme that floats around on social media all the time about how the teachers told us we wouldn't always have a calculator in our back pocket.
Oh, right.
Right? But like, we all literally have a calculator in our back pocket now.
Right.
And we don't even need to enter it in, right? With AI, we can just talk to our phone and ask it a question. We can put in an equation and get the answer. So the world is very different now. And it's about saying what is necessary in the world today.
Right. Yes. And I think you're absolutely right. It's like, there's just so much, I just have to share the story of my own kid. So he's in we homeschooled. We didn't unschool, we homeschooled, for, I think it was through 1st through 5th grade, 2nd through 5th grade, something like that. And then he wanted to go back to school for the social aspect of it. We live rurally and he was feeling isolated. And so we said yes. But interestingly, I mean, I have to say that with these children growing up with the internet, which you and I didn't, we did not grow up with this level of access to information. And it blows my mind, the things that he knows. Like, literally, like the other day we ran into a Spanish teacher and I forget, it was something about the Mexican peso. And my son was like, yeah, I think last year it was, the exchange rate was blah, 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 blah. And I was like, okay. Like, I don't even, like, I am like, wow, okay, he's just picking up all this stuff. And then, he got some money for his birthday and he's like, yeah, I'm going to save up to build my own computer. I'm like, what? Okay. Like, things that they're just, I think the children of today are, they are so, what I tend to notice, and you can tell me if you notice this too, but they're just making the connections that they're making in their brain with the information that they're coming in with, is pretty vast, it seems like, just very wide and very open. So it would make sense that, unschooling is a way to kind of allow them to go as far and as fast as they want to go in any given direction, especially like what you're saying, like things are changing so quickly, and the educational system is not catching up at all. It's not changing. It really isn't, very little.
Right?
Yeah.
It hasn't. And now I'm a big supporter of screen-free up to a certain age. My son didn't watch anything until he was almost 5. But the thing is that I think that the key is raising kids that know that they're capable of learning, right? Like a lot of what limits us is when we don't feel like we're capable of taking that something on, right? We're scared that we won't be able to figure it out. Where kids, so I think that to raise kids that know they're capable. So I'm not saying, put an iPad in their hand when they're 1 or 2 years old. I'm a pretty big advocate. Right. Like I'm a pretty big advocate against that. But they're so capable and they have their finger on the pulse of where the world is now. Like even 20 years ago, like the idea that we would all have smartphones in our pocket. Like I got my first cell phone when I was 17 and it was like the new thing. Before that, you had to like go find a payphone. Couldn't, the cell phones, I remember my friends' parents had them, attached to the engine of the vehicle. It was like this massive thing. So everything has changed just since kind of those of us that are parents now were kids, let alone say 150 years ago. Yeah. And all of this was determined, the subjects like breaking down. And that's also one of the really big things about unschooling. So the way we typically think about education is math is separate from history. But the way that the world works around us, it's very much connected to history. So why are we separating these subjects out? In something like raising animals, you can find every subject within one kind of passion or one thing that you're interested in, right? There's math in there, obviously. There's history, because I had to research the kind of animal, the kind of sheep to get. That I was born and raised in Alaska, so what breed would work really well here? So you're learning history, you're learning culture, like how these breeds even develop. I'm writing out a budget to figure out how I can make this happen. Like there's so many different elements to it. Then I was also showing the animals at the fair. So you have that element too. So anything that a kid is interested in, you're gonna find all of these subjects somewhere in it, but it's gonna be in a holistic way. It's not gonna be all fragmented, like typically the way we would think about learning happening.
Yeah, interesting. So the question that's coming up for me, I think about moving forward into college education. So I felt as a young person how frustrated I was that I had to take all these general education, like 2 years of your 4 years is spent taking these BS classes that you'll never do anything with. It was like, oh, this is about having a well-rounded education. So I had like political science and biology and computer science and astronomy and things that I would never take. But I was like, okay, well, I'm just going to look through the catalog and I know I have to fulfill these requirements. So there we have it. And I feel, and I'm surprised that still is in place. Why do we force an individual? I mean, I get it. Maybe if you're going into college and you don't know what you want to do and you want to explore different subjects. But for me at the time, I was like, I want to do art. I would have been happy as a clam to just take art classes all 4 years,
Right.
So that's something that I'm noticing. And in the young people today, I mean, I loved college, but it really didn't serve me in the real world.
Right.
So I feel like that's the other thing that's coming up for young people now. I have a kid that's at the University of Arizona, and he's in the university. He took 2 years off from high school and quickly realized, like, okay, well, I don't want to work at menial jobs, so I guess I better go to college, because what other option is there? And I've heard one of my teachers had said that, she sees like in the future that college is going to be kind of obsolete in a way, like it's going to have to change in order for us to keep up with what's going on in the world. So I don't know what your thoughts are on that. I mean, children that are unschooled, I guess my question, like, did you go into college, or what was your path after being unschooled?
No, so all through kind of my early and mid-teen years, I actually planned on becoming a veterinarian. That was my passion. And then same thing hit me. I have to go to 2 years to study stuff that means nothing to becoming a vet.
Yeah.
I'm clear on what I want to do. Like, I don't need to go explore these other things. Why would I go waste 2 years of my life learning stuff that is irrelevant to what I want to learn? So I know there can be an argument for, you're right, like, well, it creates a well-rounded person, but I think that is more of a story.
Yeah. Buy that.
Right. I really don't. Yeah. And so I was very clear that that's what I wanted to do. And that was my whole plan. And I thought, why would I go into school for, it was like, I can't remember, 6 or 8 years total. This is ridiculous. And I also knew that I wanted to be a large livestock vet, and that it was, pretty obvious to me that the money was in cats and dogs. And that just wasn't anything that I was interested in. I wanted to be out with livestock.
It cut out there on my end for a little bit. But basically, yeah, I got that so you did not go towards veterinary school.
No, I decided not to. And then I pivoted and I got into Rolfing, which was my profession.
Gotcha.
For years. And I jumped into that instead. I actually got into massage therapy to begin with, just because, you hit 17, 18 and people ask you what you're going to be when you grow up.
Yeah.
And it was, in so many ways, it was just to get people off my back. Yeah. I wasn't totally clear, and I thought, well, I'll just do this because it's something. But there was an element that I really liked about it. But I pivoted into Rolfing because I really connected with that. I started receiving Rolfing, and it just made sense. So it was essentially like going to a trade school. You go to the Rolf Institute, actually in Boulder, Colorado, and you just you study the thing that you're there to study. It's the same thing as going to like become an electrician or a carpenter or a welder. You go in and you study the thing that you actually care about.
Yeah. The only school that I know of where you're allowed to design your degree is Evergreen.
Is that Northern California?
That's I think it's in Washington.
Okay.
I believe. But anyway, yeah, there's very few. I think there's very few universities that have that kind of a program. But anyway, so yeah, interesting. So okay, so let's jump into the human design stuff. So tell us about that, because I mean, I know very little about. I mean, I've tinkered in human design. I've pulled up the charts, like, what is my husband? What is my son? Who am I? So yeah, tell us about that journey.
So I was introduced to human design, I guess it was 4 years ago now. And originally it was kind of the typical human design that you'll find, which is based on, so it's a combination of a few different modalities. We have the I Ching, we have astrology, we have the chakra system, the Kabbalah. I feel like I'm missing something there. Wow. But the general one would be based on tropical astrology. So then about a year and a half in, I made a shift to cosmic human design that pulls from your sidereal astrology chart. So if you're not familiar, it's exactly the same chart. So if you look at your tropical and you look at your sidereal next to each other, it's exactly the same chart, but it's shifted. So they both would have been aligned at some point. But because of over the thousands of years, the planet has shifted. It's on an axis, so the planet is shifting.
Okay, it has to do with the magnetic pole shifting.
Right. Okay. And so it shifts a little bit. So they were once aligned, but now I think it's 23 degrees off. So your chart looks the same, it's just shifted 23 degrees. So with sidereal, it's shifted with that shift of the planet. So if a baby is born and you walk outside and you were to look up at the sky, what you see would be your sidereal chart. It's where the planets actually are. It's actually happening. Oh, wow. So I find it to be far more accurate to the reality of who we are on this planet now. So sidereal is also known as Vedic astrology. So it's what they use in India, or what they use, basically what they use everywhere except the West.
West. So Vedic and sidereal are the same.
Yeah.
They're just different names. Okay.
Yeah. So it's, again, it's far more accurate who the person is. So I shifted, and I did have a little bit of an identity crisis when I made the shift. It was a very interesting process. I'm actually very thankful that I started with tropical, and then made the shift, but it was not an easy shift to make, because I think it's so hard to start identifying with this picture of yourself.
Yeah.
But
So
when I made the shift,
did it actually shift your sign? Because I know for myself, in Western, I'm like Scorpio. Vedic, I'm Libra.
Yep.
So
what'll happen, so like for me, and I'm not very well versed at all in astrology, but if your sign is on one edge of that house, I guess you would say, in tropical, if you shift it 23 degrees, you might still be in that place.
Sure.
It might just be at the other end. But if you start at the far end, it'll shift you to the next.
Right.
So things can actually stay very similar, or they can shift a lot. But then when it goes over into human design, it can really change stuff. So originally human design is a very kind of complex thing, but on a very basic level, I was a right angle cross of, oh my gosh, what was I? I was a right angle cross of Contagion. And I shifted to a left angle cross of Limitations. So a lot shifted in that. So, I mean, we could talk all day about what all of these different terms mean, but in the very general sense, I believe that we made a choice to come onto this planet now, to have this human experience in this body with the people around us. This was all a plan, whether we remember it now that we're actually in this body or not, that we're here for a purpose, for certain lessons. So I find that human design really kind of lays out a way of seeing that or interpreting that plan in a way that I can feel like it's actionable, right? So it's like how we make decisions. So a really good example is I make decisions, and I've always known I've made decisions very quickly. So I have what's called sacral authority. So I can make a decision. If someone asks me something, I can make a decision really, really quickly, because my body says or And I've learned over the years to really respect that because if I force myself into doing it and I wasn't really there for it, it's a struggle. And either I drop it very quickly or I'm frustrated the entire time. Or if it's something that I feel that instant yes to, then I know it doesn't matter what roadblocks I come up against or what challenges I have. It doesn't really matter, because I have the energy to push through it.
Yeah, because you said
right. So in respecting that, I know I'm going to have continued energy to maintain this kind of enthusiasm. It's not just in the moment.
Yeah.
So where I think it's really powerful for parents and kids is generally our kids are nothing like us. I mean, sometimes they're actually eerily similar to us, and that's a different challenge. But a lot of times they're so different from us. And an example is my son makes decisions very differently than me. He needs a little bit of time. He's what's called an emotional authority. So he will have an instant response to something, but he needs a little bit of time to let that emotion of it leave. So if he's super excited or he's not liking the idea, he needs to let that emotional wave pass and then decide from more of a neutral place. So if he's too much in the moment and excited about it to make a decision, a lot of times he'll wake up the next day and be like, I don't care about doing this. Like, this is not something I'm interested in. But if we wait to make the decision for 24 hours, 3 days, a week, depending on what it is, and he's like, no, this is absolutely something that I want to do, then he will maintain that energy. But if I treated him like me and forced him to make decisions that I know work well for me, it was challenge after challenge after challenge, even in just the first, few years of his life.
Mm-hmm. Interesting. Wow. So I can see how, human design helps you to see their personality. And so then does it also, obviously then it helps you as a parent in terms of guiding them with their own journey in their learning, for example, right?
Yes. And going back to actually when we were talking about the kind of this idea that doing all these classes creates a well-rounded person, it's very similar, I guess, in the way I would describe it when they're young doing unschooling. So it's about exposing kids to lots of different things, right? Like I have never played an instrument. It's never been something that was high on my list. But to know, like, I don't know, maybe that's something that he's really going to be drawn to. Maybe that's how he's going to learn math.
Mm-hmm.
And so to expose him to instruments. So I had a friend that was an amazing musician. And when my son was very young, I would have him come over to the house and he would bring all sorts of instruments and let him bang on them and play with him and it just explore it. And I could see, he's more drawn to this.
Mm-hmm.
And then to create more opportunities, right? Take him to a rodeo, go to a museum, like a wide range of things where they can experience a lot of different things. And then as the parent, you can start to see, they really gravitate toward, and my son gravitates toward anything that is very physical. Mm-hmm. So honestly, if I had taken him to bull riding, he probably would have been like, yeah.
Right on. Yeah. Totally.
I didn't expose him to that, but that's where I feel like that's more when we say like a well-rounded person, like it's not going to be that they're going to be interested in all of these things equally, but to have this varied experience and then to see, they're really drawn to, they're always like building something wherever they go. It doesn't matter who's there. It doesn't matter what's going on. They're building, something. Mm-hmm. Like doing more stuff around engineering and seeing if that, is the thing that sparks their interest.
Yeah, and that's interesting. What it's bringing up for me is I'm just thinking about, my childhood. Like, so I'm a projector, splenic projector, and it's taken me this long to. Well, I didn't know anything about human design, and I finally. It's like when I read my whatever the analysis is, it's like, oh wow, I really I should be doing much, much less. And but we're just programmed to be productive 24/7. And I think that I could see where, let's say a child, projector child who needs lots of time to rest and recharge, who doesn't need the constant stimulation and doing, that they need actually lots of space and time to be with themselves. I could see where in that instant, because that's not really acceptable in our society. And in fact, if a child is like, I need rest, the parent's going to think that there's some kind of pathology going on. Like, oh my God, something's wrong with my child. I need to take her to the doctor. What's going on here? And rather than just being like, oh, this is just who she is and this is what she needs, not immediately jumping to, oh, something's wrong with this child,
Yes, that is so important. So another really good example is the manifester. So there is, again, we could talk about this all day, but there's four types. There's generators, projectors, manifestors, and reflectors. But a manifester initiates things. They don't have energy to finish them. Generally, generators will come in and finish. Manifestors, what they're here to do is to initiate things. So that's a really common thing with kids too. Like you'll have that kid that wants to start stuff but not finish it. So if we believe that we have to always finish what we start, right? And maybe as a parent, we're a generator and we have energy to do that, and that's what we're here to do, we're always going to be butting heads and fighting. Where maybe this child really is here to try lots of different things and just initiate them and start and create something new. So that's another great example Maybe we don't have energy. Maybe it's just, they just always want to start stuff. They don't ever care about finishing it. And so to embrace that, maybe that's the life path for them. I think it takes so much stress out of the whole dynamic where we can just allow people to be like nobody. And it's this whole idea of the 4.0 GPA. Like nobody is like that as an adult. And again, the argument is usually used that, well, it's creating a well-rounded individual. You have to learn things sometimes even if you don't want to. Like it's like a good story, but I think there's a different way of looking at it.
Yeah.
Everybody might be a bit happier.
Yeah. And yeah, pointing to that, like for me, the good student becomes almost like a shadow archetype, because we can end up going through life thinking that, oh, I have to figure out how to do it right. I'm going to be the good student, but actually maybe, and it's taking away from our own inner wisdom. So I feel like what you're speaking to is like really, as a parent, guiding a child to their own genius, to their own knowing, to their own wisdom. I mean, really, like, I feel like education should really be more about learning about who you are rather more so. I mean, yes, subject matter is important, but it's missing definitely, I think, in education. So this is so powerful, because if a child is raised to know who they are, they're so much better equipped to navigate the world, right? They're not putting themselves in situations that don't resonate for them. They're not going to get lost, feeling like, oh my God, what's happened to my life? I feel totally confused, Yeah. So it's very, really empowering. So I want you, how can people work with you? What do you offer?
You froze a little bit.
Oh, okay. What do you offer for people? How can people work with you?
So I can work with people directly one-on-one. I've always loved doing events. So I like creating events where these things can play out naturally, where kids can play. I'm a huge supporter of risky play. I think that it's incredibly valuable for kids to challenge their bodies and understand how their bodies work. And you cannot learn that from a textbook. You have to learn that from getting out and tumbling off of something and trying to do something physically. So I like to do events around that and play events around that as well.
Beautiful. And tell me again where you're located. You're on the East Coast?
We're on the East Coast, so we've been traveling full time for the last 2 years, trying to find a place that we're meant to settle down. We were in the New England area most recently. My son was born in New York, and then we've been in the New England area, and I think that we've settled on Charleston, South Carolina.
Beautiful.
So, yeah, we'll be East Coast.
Beautiful. So yeah, anybody that's watching this, if you're someone that is either, you're homeschooling perhaps, and you're like, I'd like to learn more about unschooling, or even just, and I'm guessing that you also provide like human design readings?
Yep, human design readings. For the way it works really well is to do parent and child together. So you can kind of see if there's something that you just always struggled with, to kind of see it through this lens.
Yeah.
Help shift that can be really, really powerful.
Yeah. Excellent. So they can find you at moiramills.com. And so again, you offer one-on-ones, you're doing events in your area. And is there anything else you want to share with us?
I think that's it. That's it.
Yeah. Yeah, there's so much to this. And, obviously there's books out there that people can read on unschooling, but I think it's far more valuable to actually speak to somebody face to face that actually has real experience. Again, nothing like real life. And
we need more face to face human interaction these days.
Yeah. So Moira, thank you so much. And so yes, if you guys have questions, post them in the comments. And please like and subscribe to this channel and check out Moira at her website. And yeah, this was great. Thank you so much, Moira.
Thank you for having me.
All right. Bye for now.